Welcome to Digital Humans, a podcast where we learn from leading experts about how we can harness technology to evolve our organizations and our lives. This podcast is sponsored by SmartLab. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Digital Humans podcast. My name is Georg Seiler and I'm joined with my co-host Jessie Tung.
Hello.
This podcast is about learning from leading experts on how we can harness the best of digital to evolve our organizations and lives. It is about putting people at the center of transformation initiatives and harnessing the incredible opportunities that technology presents. Today's episode is all about creating meaningful alternatives, and we are delighted to be joined by our guest today, Dorota Pietruszewska, an executive coach and member of the Ludic Faculty. Dorota, welcome. We are delighted to have you with us today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here. So, Dorota, you are an executive coach who specializes in all aspects of leadership, creating meaningful alternatives and having an entrepreneurial mindset are components of that and the topics you work with daily. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and what led you to your current role?
Yes, absolutely. So I've had 3 careers in my lifetime to date. I started working in art, fresh out of university, and I spent about 3 years working in London in arts PR and with a variety of different galleries, sort of soaking up the London art scene, which was an incredible experience, incredible thing to do in your mid-20s, as you can imagine. So it was a great place to be, but I think I very quickly realized that I wasn't going to progress in that world very quickly. It's quite a lateral universe where people tend to move side to side rather than climb up a career ladder in the classic fashion. And I decided to pivot. And that was my first career change, so to say. And I decided to go and try to work for a corporate. So I went into the services industry, ended up working for the corporate executive board and then for Gartner for 15 years in total, eventually advising C-level executives on how to operationalize their strategies. So I had my opportunity to sort of climb the ranks and build a career in that world, which was amazing. But towards the end of that stint, I got married, I had 2 children, and I realized that I needed to sort of balance and prioritize in life in a slightly different fashion. So I decided to pivot for a second time, and I left the corporate world and set up my own business as an executive coach, advising executives on the various aspects of managing their own careers and doing what they need to do day to day from a coaching perspective as an independent contributor, which is what I do now in a setup that also allows me to be around for my young family.
It's such a big switch from the art world into the corporate world, and then now another switch again. What are some of the key characteristics of helping to define what that meaningful alternative looks like for you? You said you did a lot of research and you were looking into this as you made the decision. What are some of the factors driving your decision-making process to switch?
That's a really good question. And I think it's something that was personally important for me on my journey. And it's something I work with day to day as a coach as well. I think there's probably one big theme to it. And the theme, I guess, is research. So any change or any pivot, any sort of transformation you need to go through in your working life, in your personal life, whatever it might be, is rooted in something that doesn't quite fit or doesn't quite align anymore. So you're in a world that used to work for you and that you are in for a reason, but all of a sudden you're starting to feel a bit of friction and a misalignment and you need to make a change. And there's probably 2 areas that are really worth exploring as part of that feeling or as you sense this sort of energy come up? The first thing is, what is it inside me that's not aligning anymore? And that's usually some sort of a values exercise. If you use me as an example, in my shift from art to into the corporate world, the values that weren't aligning was ambition. I wanted to move really fast, really quickly, and I wanted to move up. And that's something that wasn't possible in the setup I was in at the time I was in it. Therefore, I decided to change my habitat in order to create that opportunity for myself. In the second shift I made, the friction was I absolutely adored my work. I adored my job. I was in a great place doing great stuff. But I also had this young family who I absolutely love and adore. And the time I was devoting to one took away time from the other, which caused a sense of friction for me. I just wanted to be there for my family a little bit more. So I think that the primary thing is to realize what is not aligning in terms of your value system in order to be able to set a direction for where you go. However, having done that, you need to think about, out of all the 1,000,001 options I now have in terms of where to pivot to, you need to start narrowing down areas of opportunity to the areas that actually align with you and suit you. And that's usually sort of helped by a lot of research. And I guess different people do research in different ways. Some people read everything on the internet and in books and in other media available to them. Other people, like me, go out and talk to people in order to figure out what's out there, how it works, and what could possibly align. Some people do a mix of both, but the bottom line is you need to figure out what's out there in order to help yourself narrow in whatever way that works for you, to help yourself to narrow down the options.
Dorota, making the career switch can be quite scary, also exciting as well. What advice would you have for those who are hesitant to take this leap? And then how can they prepare themselves during the transition? Also, what are the common triggers that push people to change their career paths? How should they navigate those changes effectively, in your view?
So I think ask yourself why you're wanting to make the switch. Because there's people who want to throw in the towel because they've had a bad week and they're not loving their manager and they've had it and they want to walk away. And that's probably not the best trigger for a career shift. If this is a sort of more deeper rooted, longer term scenario or situation, that it's probably worth digging down into why that change needs to happen in order to help yourself figure out how to build from there. And then I guess how to prepare depends on where you're going. If you're going to go solo, you need to think about financial security first and foremost, because if you set up a business, having left your job yesterday, the reality is it's going to take you a beat to start generating income from that business. So it's probably worth planning in timings and factoring in some sort of financial buffer in order to help yourself on the journey. But irrespective of whether you change to another corporate or whether you go it solo, it's probably worth thinking about some sort of research and building out a support system of people, be it mentors, be it people in organizations you're interested in, be it other entrepreneurs, be it coaches, in order to help you think through about where you're going to go next and how, so that this transition is thought through and considered in order to help yourself sort of go through the process as smoothly as possible.
Sounds great. And I also recently changed my career path as well. As you know, I mean, one comment to make there, I would say always enjoy the journey as well. I think it's going to be exciting, but also some ups and downs as well. But then I think it's always important to enjoy that journey and then see how the journey will evolve.
Absolutely. And I really admire that about you, Jessie, actually. That's a really good mindset to go into things with.
And Jessie, we're thrilled that you decided to make the career shift as well and be part of the Ludic team.
To shift towards you, right? So no, it has been great. It has been great. I learned so much in this environment. Thank you.
No, it's wonderful.
And I guess the other thing to remember as part of that is while it's important to enjoy, it's not always going to be rosy, right? There's always a balance to things and things happen in waves. And even if you're doing the thing you absolutely adore and love, you're always going to have those good days which are absolutely fabulous. And you're going to have days which are a little bit less fabulous. And as long as all that fits in with the overall vision of what you're working towards and what you ultimately enjoy building, then you're actually in a really good place.
Definitely. Yeah.
And Dorota, we see in the learning programs that we're delivering that coaching always plays a really impactful role. It's often a catalyst that brings the learning to life or really supports the individual transformations, which then ripples through to the wider organizational shifts in mindset and behaviors and so forth. So could you tell us a little bit about what does some of that coaching work look like? So when you're meeting a client and you're looking at, you mentioned already some of the vision and direction and action planning, what are some of the things that you do as a coach working with people?
Good question. As you'll know from your chats with other coaches, probably all coaches are obsessed with identifying the gap. We're always talking about what's the gap. And what we mean by that is when we start working with a coachee, the most important thing for us is to be able to accurately help them determine the gap, as we call it, so the distance between where they currently are and where they ultimately want to be. So in a typical coaching scenario in its most basic form, you'll talk with a coachee about where they currently are, what's working and what's not working about their current setup. We'll talk about where you want to be, and there's all sorts of tools that we use as part of those conversations. One of my favorite ones, which one of my coaches, who is absolutely brilliant, used with me, is you ask someone to describe their ideal day. Factoring in family and work and all the other stuff that we need to do day to day in order to sort of go through the works of life, not an ideal day on holiday lying under a palm tree, but an actual day in your normal life. It's amazing what people come up with. And I think there's a lot to be taken from that observation as far as defining that gap goes. Because while people assume that talking about where you are now and where you want to be is a very simple thing, and they think they can rattle it off and just tell you what's what very, very easily, once you actually start having those conversations, you realize that as a coachee or listening to a coachee, people start uncovering things they had not thought of before, or they had not voiced before, and they hadn't realized before. And the benefit in having a coach listen and reflect means they have an objective ear there to help them pull out those threads they might have otherwise missed, which helps them get to the root of why the change and what the future should really look like, and helps them close that gap in the most efficient, effective, and aligned kind of way.
You're listening to Digital Humans, sponsored by Smart Lab, a leading experience management platform for events, learning, and change. So within your work, along with digital tools, you emphasize the importance of also utilizing human-centric approach. Could you talk a little bit about this? What are the characteristics and how can that influence career development and the success in the corporate world?
Absolutely. So when I say human-centric, I mean a person essentially brings their whole self to work. I think our working infrastructure, or the setup that we use at work today, largely, is historically so rooted in almost the factories of the Industrial Revolution, up to the boomer generation and partially also into the world of the millennials. A lot of us have drawn a very, very clean line between this is who I am in private and this is who I am at work. So you have a persona that you show up as. That's the sort of old school work mentality. And it's really interesting to see these younger generations these days, all the Gen Zers, etc., bringing a totally different approach to their day-to-day work, where they want to show up as themselves, they want to show who they are, and they want to be able to integrate that into their day-to-day. And I feel like that sort of attitude or that vibe is spreading across the broader workforce. I also feel like what happened during COVID has contributed to a massive shift that's happening now, where people do want work to be a little bit more human-centric. They do want to consider their hobbies, their interests, their family lives, their setups, their passion for travel. And ultimately, while we need to be realistic and while we need to remember that, a company needs to hit its goals and get to where it wants to get to, there's a recognition now of the fact that they're going to do it quicker, more effectively, and in a much more pleasant cultural setup if they do it with people or with a workforce that is recognized for being people.
Of course. And then these days, I believe that the leadership can come in so many different shape or forms as well. In the old days, you would imagine a leader would be very top to down, or they are not very approachable. And then being part of the team, you take the orders, you're told what to do, basically. That was my imagination when I just came out of the university. But it's not like that anymore. And in Ludic, we do offer the executive learning program that we coach the leaders and then helping them to find out where their strengths are. And also, we build our methodology based on the human-centric approach as well. So it's not just trying to figure out how to help them to become a better leader, but also help them to figure out what's important in their life, how to live a more balanced life as well. And then combine with the digital, that is the key to achieve the best result. So we do understand the importance of that.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear that. I mean, if you wanted to hear an example, I was at a wedding last weekend and I heard a beautiful example of what you just described. So someone was telling me about his brother who just moved from a big town in Germany into a very, very small town, industrial town in the north of Germany because of a job that he's been offered. He's not too enthused about living in a small town, but he did make the shift because that's where the work is and that's where the opportunity was. So he moved his entire family. The bonus is that town is on the sea. And that man is an avid surfer. And when he interviewed for the job, he point blank said to his new employer, I will move my family to this town and I will uproot our entire life. However, you need to realize I love to surf. So if I'm not at my desk for 2 hours at lunchtime, it's because I'm at the beach, and I promise you I will make up whatever work I missed during those 2 hours because I cannot make up the waves if the waves were good. And the employer said yes, and it's completely factored into his working life, and everyone on his team operates with the understanding of if the tide is good, this person's going to disappear for an hour or two in order to sort of fill his cup. But at the same time, they have a very loyal employee who thrives in his workplace and who is there present, providing what the company needs him to provide. And it's a beautiful illustration of what you just described, and a very nicely human-centric approach in a workplace.
Yeah, I definitely admire that.
This person probably is much more engaged with the role and with the job, and will probably give more really in his role and deliver his best work because he feels like his whole self is being honored. And it sounds like a great lesson from the company side that they can teach around the overall employee experience that they create. And that's a real differentiator, right?
Absolutely. Treating them as a person. And I think that's where coaching also beautifully fits in from a corporate perspective. I know we had some conversations about how coaching works in organizations and how it can be utilized as part of the transition processes in corporates or to achieve better results for organizations. I think equipping people with the tools they need in order to be the best versions of themselves within and outside of the workplace is the thing that creates the loyalty and the goodwill and that extra 20% that is going to take a company from good to great.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's, as you're speaking and as you were describing these things, a word was emerging, and that seems to be around entrepreneurship. So there's a lot here in terms of creating the future that you want to live in and working with organizations to help them create the futures that they want to move towards. So there does really feel, or there really seems to be, an entrepreneurial aspect to this. So is this an area that you like to focus on as well? It's a bit of a loaded question. I think the answer is probably yes.
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. But I think you raise a really interesting point, because if you think about it, in corporates especially, that there's that, again, as a coach, coming back to the gap between good and great is the will to do something differently, to take the initiative, to push yourself a step further than others will or would, right? And I think in big corporates, especially in the old school setup, there's enough systems, processes, and sort of very clear lanes in place in order to allow people to check the boxes, go through the works, do what they need to do, meet their metrics, and sort of keep going in those roles ad nauseum. What makes people truly great and what makes the really, really special employees that do something new, that create something new, that propel the company or whatever initiative they're on forward, are the people that are entrepreneurial. You'll both recognize it from a sales perspective. The thing that makes a really great salesperson is the salesperson that thinks outside the box and goes into the market and does what they do in a slightly different way that's not exactly perfectly part of the outline. I think entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurial mindset is almost the secret sauce to success across any industry.
And action and accountability is crucial there too. Seeing the opportunity, but then be willing to walk towards it and to start to connect the dots.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think the thing I come up in coaching sessions a lot is everybody has a wall of fear of some sort that paralyzes them. And those walls come up in the most unusual places. They might be linked with the way you speak, or they might be linked with the way someone approaches social media, or they might be linked to public speaking or sitting at tables with very senior executives. Everybody has a block of some sort. And I think success and entrepreneurship and action and all those things you just mentioned are brilliant, but I think whoever is doing the job and in the flow and walking towards that goal also needs to be very aware of the fact that on that journey, they're going to meet those small walls of fear, and they just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep walking through them one step after the other in order to get to the final destination they're headed to. And I think that's very much a part of the process. And in coaching, a lot of work gets done around that and around mindsets connected to that, because ultimately that's the process of change.
So we talk about your career transition, and then a little bit on the entrepreneurship, and then also how to build the best version of yourself. So finally, looking ahead 5 years from now, what do you think it will mean to be a digital human?
Good question. I think being a digital human is going to mean further utilizing the tech at our disposal to become the best versions of ourselves as people, as well as communities. And I feel like this is the sort of cycle we've been in ever since technology became a thing. And ever since we started utilizing it, we always went through an area of surprise and novelty, be it the car, the plane, the internet, the mobile phone, you name it. And then over time, we figured out how to integrate those tools into our day-to-day as people, as individuals, but also as a workforce, as employees, business owners, and ultimately used it to better ourselves and better the workplaces we exist within. So I'm hoping we can keep that loop going, but with a positive outcome for people and communities.
Thank you so much, Dorota. And I think that's a really inspiring vision to end on today. Hopefully, if we can all apply some of these things in our day-to-day lives that you spoke of, we can get there to this inspiring vision. So I just wanted to say that it's been a great pleasure to hear your story and insights and wisdoms. And thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we want to thank all the listeners as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to the Digital Humans podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Digital Humans is hosted by me, Georg Seiler.
And me, Jessie Tung.
Produced by Melanie Price and John McGinty. Edited by Danny Cross, with artwork by Alex Matthews and scribed images by Ludic Creatives. This podcast is brought to you by SmartLab.